So, hello everyone, and welcome back to the NeuroCalm Fatigue Summit. And my name's Anna and Andreas, I'm your host. And today I have with me Professor Andreas Philippopoulos Mihalopoulos, often known to his friends as Andreas PM, who is an academic slash artist slash fiction author. And Andreas has spent a lot of time thinking about the disruption and unsustainability of the way that we conceive generally in the West of the body-mind split. He thinks a lot with environmental questions and sustainability, and he spends a lot of time reflecting on what might be a much more generative imaginary of the body, of the world, of planetary entanglements to live from. Now, in this conference, themes have emerged in the talks about body-mind medicine, which reflects, of course, the fact that there's a body-mind split in the first place. Themes have come up around the toxicity of contemporary life and what that means for people living with fatigue. And we've also been asking the question of what fatigue might mean as a really deep signal, both as a warning sign and a sign of hope and potential revolution, in a sense. And so Andreas and I are going to have a conversation about some of these themes, drawing on his reflections, his rich work in this field. So Andreas, welcome.
Thank you ever so much. It's a real pleasure being here.
It's really delightful to have you, Andreas, because one of the questions this whole thing is set up against is, what if fatigue is an important healing message to a stressed out world? And what if fatigue related to that means that we have to rethink everything? And it's this rethinking everything and what it might mean for people living with fatigue that I'd really love to explore with you today. So I'm just wondering if you have some opening thoughts.
Thank you so much. I think, first of all, it's an excellent idea to think about fatigue as a message of hope. But of course, pretty much like every hope, it needs a lot of work for it to happen, and it's somehow counterintuitive to think about fatigue. Okay, I need to work in order for fatigue to be. The way maybe I should speak about the way I feel about fatigue, because there's a sort of intellectualizing way of talking about fatigue, of course, but there's also a way of a more sensorially, let's say, attuned way of thinking about fatigue, or feeling fatigue. And not so much, I mean, I have been feeling fatigue as well, but I don't suffer from fatigue in a kind of a chronic way. What happens though when I can feel the onset of fatigue, I can feel that there's something about scale, intensification or density of fatigue, or of signs of fatigue, and there's a tipping point. So I think I think we all used to working at this kind of pressure point constantly and trying to avoid that tipping point. Whatever we do, it's always until the very last moment that we can do it, and until the very last, let's say, barrier, after which fatigue will set in. And in so doing, we become so, I guess, blinded by this, and by this activity, which is very it's incredibly rewarding in some ways, but then of course it falls into this economy of reward. So you act and then you get the reward, and then you're happy, and then you carry on doing that, and there's this kind of validation or whatever it is that comes with it. But then there is this point, and after which something that feels that's happening is that there is almost a separation of the self, so that it's almost not you anymore, not the one you want to be, perhaps not the one your parents wanted you to be, not the construction of the self you've had, because fatigue actually stops you from even considering that, because you can't, it's out. But yet you retain that sense of, okay, I still need to do this, I still need to achieve this, I still need to be somewhere there, and yet you see that you can't. So there's this moment of, and then you observe yourself a bit, and it feels to me that this is a little bit what is happening currently with the world, with the human being. Anna, we've talked a lot, you and I, and we've exchanged texts, and we worked on this idea of what is the idea of the human in terms of the Enlightenment. And so the Enlightenment, roughly speaking, after the French Revolution, 1789, we all celebrated the rationality of the human, as opposed to a human that was subject to the king, the obscurantism of religion, this moment of theocracy together with, and all that stuff. And instead, we go for science, for rationality, etc. We now see, as you know, Anna, very well, that this is no longer the case. That we needed that thing, that focus on rationality at that point, but we missed out a huge deal. And this is the question of the body, the question of women, the question of, there's so much that came out of Enlightenment rationality, inheritance, which it has been very useful, it's done its job, and now it has to be reconsidered. So somehow what happens is it's a little bit this again. So we used to be human, rational, language, discourse, all the things that separate us from animals, from other things, from non-human, non-inanimate bodies, etc. And all of a sudden we go there now again, and we see, well, actually, we are not just that. We're not just the rational thing that pushes us forward, who thinks about progress and thinks about, we're something slightly different too. There's a huge amount of emotions, the things we cannot control. We are full of bacteria, and our bodies are not what we consider humans. Our skin is something that connects as much as, well, more connects than separates, really, because it's all pores. So everything comes in and so much thing comes out. So I feel that there is as you said, there is this attempt to link the individual fatigue with a collective thing. There's also kind of a fatigue of who we are, like as that thing that we used to call humans, it doesn't serve us anymore. And that thing that we used to call self, and go and strive and growth and progress and all that stuff, it doesn't serve us anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people who end up with fatigue conditions, as one of the things they say, is that they literally got stopped in their tracks to face the fact that they're not what they thought they were. Mm-hmm. And the fatigue takes us on such a journey that it becomes a transformer. It becomes almost like an invitation to be a new self. And this, all the science points to the fact that this new self is thoroughly embodied. As you say, we're not just this rational brain driving around this inert lump of flesh as a body. We're, and this has come up before in this summit, we're actually a community of lively intelligences and systems and entanglement, and learning to experience ourselves as that, and to let go of this idea of a particularly constrained notion of the self, to expand into a much more expansive, connected, relational sense of the self, is truly a revolutionary moment in a life. And the question is, can we make this shift culturally? And what is it that's what fatigue is saying into the system, which I think when you were saying about being, driven by the achievements and all that, we internalize the drivers of the consumer system within which we live. We swim in it like fish who are unaware of the water that we're in. Yeah. And then it comes to roost in our bodies in these highly exhausting, destructive ways. And we see that more and more with exhaustion culturally and socially in the marketplace. And of course, it's serving fewer and fewer people. More and more people are suffering privation, feeling themselves excluded or marginalized, and all of that. Fatigue is an incredible voice, it seems to me, into that, saying, hey, guys, this is completely unsustainable. So then that raises a question of, what does fatigue tell us about a better way, Andreas, a better way to imagine our embodied selves and our embodied relationships on this planet, which is also increasingly tired? What's a better imaginary?
So one thing I'm thinking is, you said that fatigue is an opportunity to become a better self. And I'm just thinking, there is no other way. So it's not an opportunity. When you are fatigued, you are that. So I mean, in a sense, uh, again, I'll refer to you, Anna, not just your writing, but also your personal experiences. I know that you've worked a lot with your own fatigue, and you it's a constant labor of care, of love, of boundaries, but also of connections, and I have so much respect for this. But I also think that you had no choice. I mean, this is it. You are it. So
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there is a sense in which, of course, you don't get a choice because you're presented with an embodied reality. Your
yeah,
body is doing stuff, and the rational mind that maybe once thought it was so in control
yeah,
isn't,
yeah.
and begins to realize, I guess, if you choose to open, and this is where the choice comes in. The
Right.
choice is, how do I respond to that?
Mm,
There are ways of responding to the inevitable.
mm,
So there, at one level, no, there isn't a choice because that happened. At another level, there's a load of choices made all the time. How do I respond to this? Do I close? Do I open? Do I embrace? Do I resist?
mm, mm.
Those sort of choices that people with fatigue make every single day. And
You're
some
absolutely right.
people,
Yeah,
some people literally have to make those choices simply to get through the day.
yeah. But what you're absolutely right. What I think I meant was that by realizing that one is suffering from fatigue or is going through fatigue is already a different self.
Yes.
So so I know you talked about a lot of work in order to, but this is managing. I think the biggest moment is when this becomes a realization, even for a brief period of time. I think I actually I just realized that I mean I had fatigue for about 10 days and I didn't know what it was, and there were, blood tests and all that stuff. But the fatigue simply meant couldn't do anything. And it was okay. I actually listened to it and I said, this is it. I mean, I'm just stay on the sofa. Of course, I had the luxury to do this, etc. And this is a hugely privileged position to be in. However, I think I already became a different self as soon as I realized that this was it.
Mm.
And somehow I had no choice. I just couldn't.
Yeah.
And so this is
I think that's right, Andres. But I think also, what does the self mean
mm,
anyway? Because I think fatigue shows us that we're multiple
right.
and that we're multi-layered. And one of the interesting things about working with fatigue is going down into the layers of the self to find out all the things that are going on there.
Mm,
It's a very complex journey, and some of the experts on this summit have, really shown the complexity, not just the physiological complexity, which is one thing,
yeah.
but the layers of emotion, the psychic stuff, even spiritual complexities.
Mm,
Um, and of course, the body as a system constantly reaches out for relations beyond itself
mm,
and relations within itself. And I have found that having this fatigue journey has really made me attuned to that reaching out and reaching in that the body itself does, irrespective of what I think is going on in my rational mind. That the
mm,
body is this symphony that plays harmonious and discordant notes and dynamics that are all about reaching out and reaching in, closing and opening, a wonderful, moving
mm,
thing. But of course, that makes living with it complex. But that again comes back to the gesture you were making earlier that I think is so powerful of this. Oh, we need to open, we need to expand and allow and let go. And somehow it's in that we learn truly when we're humble, when we understand that the body is this wonderful set of glorious, insightful intelligences that you said, you stopped, you listened to your body. 10 days is a really light sentence, may I say, but fantastic that you tuned in that way. And I suspect then that one of the things, and I'd love your thoughts on this, that fatigue is saying to us culturally, is precisely the importance of learning to let go, learning to realize that the future is multidimensional, that these old systems of power over are having their day, are too tired and too inept for what is now emerging. And somehow those of us living with fatigue, I think, are at the forefront of this, even if we don't understand it.
I think this is you're talking about almost a movement here, and I'm very keen on hearing this movement becoming a very slow and very full movement. Without wanting to consign our interview to the politics of the everyday, but and therefore to oblivion. But it's really interesting how in the United Kingdom we've gone through a very, very quick succession of narratives, with Liz Truss being the Prime Minister, and going for this budget of growth. And that's this justification, and growth at the expense of social fairness, equity, justice, for the privileged, for the few, extraordinary stuff. But at the same time, the main rhetoric, which somehow sanctified everything else, was growth. And even the Conservative Party rejected that. And that I found quite astonishing. I mean, probably not the whole Conservative Party and all the stuff, but people, even Conservative MPs became really quite aware of this rhetoric and how this is problematic. And in a sense, I posit this growth as the opposite of, let's say, fatigue as a weapon against this mania for growth. But there's something else too. There's this interesting German sociologist called Niklas Luhmann, who has talked about not exactly fatigue, but talked about what he mentioned, the white noise of communication, of too much communication about something, too much brouhaha about, and he was targeting specifically the ecological cause, and that was back in the 90s, if I remember correctly, where in Germany was a big thing. And currently we have the same kind of, such a huge noise happening. Recently the Stop Oil activists who threw soup on the, and this is very important, on the glass protecting Van Gogh's chrysanthemum, what is called, the the flowers. No, it's the sunflowers or chrysanthemum. I don't like impressions. And so this is an interesting debate, because is there a fatigue with this too much noise? So there's an interesting thing about how you can bang on about a cause and end up in this kind of moment of too much noise, which becomes white noise, and therefore people do not listen to it anymore. And so there's almost like there's a fatigue that is caused in the general population because of that, because of political fatigue, etc. And that's also problematic in the sense that this is not a movement. This is the opposite. This is apathy. Then you go into this, oh, well, I've heard that before, and I'm not going to take action. So I think this is really important to bring the question of choice here, you mentioned earlier. So collectively, there's always choice. And the choice is to use this energy, whatever, or even this lack of energy. There's I don't want to put too many references here, but there's for balance sake, I'll mention a French philosopher. His name is Maurice Blanchot, and he's written something about the unworking. And that's a really beautiful concept, because it's not about work in order to produce work, but it's about unweaving. And he refers to Penelope, from the Odyssey, where Penelope is the spouse of Odysseus, who's around, sailing and doing the manly thing and all that stuff. And Penelope is at home weaving this huge thing. But at night, she's unweaving it. So she's unworking. And there's again an Italian philosopher, Cavarero, who actually she's really keen on thinking about this unworking and what it means. So unworking is almost, it still needs work, but it is a very conscious understanding of how your work, the work you're doing in order to preserve yourself, to preserve your connections, to create new connections, new synapses with other people, with networks, and to safeguard yourself and your community. That's a unworking, in the sense that it's not work for growth. It's not work for money. It's not work. It might bring that too, but that's irrelevant. The main point is you're doing it because you know that you need to do it. And Penelope needed to do this because there were several lovers waiting for her to finish that thing. That was the deadline they imposed on her. And as soon as she would finish that thing, she would have to choose a new, spouse or something like that, because they all presumed that Odysseus was already dead by then. Of course, there was a happy end and all that stuff. But the point is, happy end in the sense that everyone died. The point is that this unworking, this fatigue that she must have experienced with all this, let's put it, social media attention, right? That she had all these people vying for her attention, all these things that she needed to be. She needed to be a spouse. She needed to be the mistress of the home. She needed to be the hostess because they were staying there parasitically, etc. So she had all these hats, and yet at night she was unworking. She was unweaving that thing that the whole society, the whole epic society, because it's an epos, was trying to push her into.
That's a brilliant metaphor, actually, Andreas, for the multiple hats that we often wear that bring us to the point of collapse. The multiple hats that fly around socially, culturally, and in other ways. And the idea of the night, the stillness, the place that you go to unwork. And in this unworking, of course, there's a form of becoming, which is wonderful. So you're unbecoming and becoming, and you're working quietly to unwork.
Yeah.
And there's something beautiful there for sufferers from fatigue who spend a lot of their time unworking and going down, and at the same time becoming something new in that process.
And isn't the night a particular moment for that? Because of course, people who suffer from fatigue do not sleep well. I mean, this is the fact. So the night is the moment.
It is literally and also metaphorically. There is a sense in which suffering from really severe fatigue is like a night. That you're resting often on a bed or a sofa. Lots of fatigue sufferers can't cope with light because it's overstimulating to their autonomic nervous system. And so there's a wonderful metaphor in there. So I think we've covered quite a bit there, Andreas. I think we've covered the idea of the kind of connections between individual fatigue and cultural and social fatigue, and what it is that fatigue is as a form of unworking, and the nature of choice in that. Is there any parting thought you'd like to shoot out, perhaps of a nature that might really land with someone who's actively dealing with this right now?
I think change happens not when we have an individual Hollywood hero who just shows the way, but it's when there is a wave that is approaching and we can hear it, and you turn a little bit, and then you decide to ride it and float with it. And in a sense, there's this maybe romantic idea of floating along the wave, not even swimming, just going with it, but becoming this big stentorian collective. And it feels to me that fatigue is, and the realization of fatigue, and especially the way you're dealing with it, Anna, and during the summit, is part of this wave. It seems that it's an incredibly powerful tool, and I think we should join that wave.
Yeah, Thank you very much, Andreas. I really appreciate you coming along. So thank you, everyone. This is Professor Andreas Philippopoulos Mihalopoulos. I'd like to thank him very much on our behalf for his thoughts. Thank you.